All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is Arun Gupta. Hello. And with me today, I have Stephen Pousty. Hey,
Hi
Stephen.
there. Hey, Arun, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Excellent. So we are on the virtual DevRel meetup. This is a virtual meetup where we meet every other week or every third week and talk about the topics that are relevant to developer advocates, community managers, developer evangelists, whatever you call yourself. If you are interacting with developers out in the real world, this meetup is exactly meant for you. We have had some great speakers today, and I'm particularly very excited today as one of my very good friends and an ex-colleague and a very good partner, who's speaking today about DAS. So let's hear it from Stephen what DAS is and why is it very critical in our industry. Go ahead, Steve.
Thanks, Arun. Thanks, everyone, for joining, and thanks, Arun, for that nice introduction. I've been a developer advocate for about 10 years, and so I thought I'd share 10, 11. I'd share something about like some of the things I've seen, and so I'm going to talk today about developer advocate amotivational syndrome. There's the bit.ly link if you want to look at the deck yourself, if you don't want to share it here at the bottom.
You
There's
want
all
to share
the...
the screen slides?
Oh, I forgot to share. Yeah. That would be helpful. Pro tip, actually share your screen. Okay. Now you should be able to see it, right?
That is correct.
Okay. So there's the bit.ly link at the bottom, right? And then there's my coordinates over on the left side where I work, and then all the places you can find me. If you're in Ingress, I only care if you're a blue player. If you're a green player, I don't want to know you at all. Let's see. So that's just a joke, actually. I love Ingress players in general. But so let's talk about developer advocate amotivational syndrome. This actually comes from the thought for this talk's title came from my freshman year roommate, who is quite a heavy pot smoker. And he described to me what was called marijuana amotivational syndrome, which is where if you smoke too much marijuana, you just basically lay in bed all day or sit on the couch and watch TV and you do nothing else. Research has not really shown that to be true, but that's where I learned it. And I thought it applied to something else. You end up kind of like this at the end of it, right? You're just sitting on the couch, sleeping all day long. And I think for a lot of us that we call that burnout. And if you look at the Wikipedia entry from marijuana amotivational syndrome, they talk some about how that's related. Now it's anything that just basically takes the joy out of life, which is burnout. It can also be depression, right? So these are all different names that you could use for amotivational syndrome. And I think it's some of the things that we feel or we call it when we have it. And I'm not going to be covering, hold on, my dog. I'm not going to be covering all the reasons people leave a DevRel job. I've had friends who've left just because they didn't like being a DevRel person, right? They were like, yeah, I want to be an engineer. This is not for me, right? And I'm also not going to be covering you could need to make more money. Like, we are not the most highest paid profession. Our salaries are generally good, but we're not the highest paid profession in tech. And so you'd be like, well, it's not enough money for me, especially at certain companies. They don't value it enough that way. I'm also not going to be covering all the things that suck the joy out of life. I'm going to try to keep this just to things that affect developer relations people in general, because the list is way too long and we could go on for hours, and it's also very highly specific. And then on that note, I'm also going to try to avoid some of the reasons that seemed only due to particular issues in my life at the time. So most of this talk is based off of my experience and talking to several other DevRel people, right? But I'm not claiming to have done, this is not a TED Talk where I've done hours of exhaustive research or days or years of exhaustive research on what causes burnout in DevRel people. I'm just trying to get the discussion started. Again, our career is actually relatively new in the world of careers. I'd say it's probably only about 15 years old as a title in a company. So there's not a lot of best practices. There's no like the mythical man month for DevRel. So I think right now we're all kind of bootstrapping what it means. And so today I just wanted to talk about some of the stuff that I think causes burnout. So assumptions about you care a lot about your product or products. Right? I mean, that's one of the things about being DevRel is you care a lot. You are a passionate person. Whether you're quiet or not, that's another issue. You care a lot about your users. To be really good at DevRel, you actually have to care about your users, meaning the developers that are actually using your product. You have a strong personality. Now, by saying this, I don't mean that you're an extrovert, right? There's a difference between being an extrovert and a strong personality. And I would say most DevRel people I've met have a strong personality. And you like having friends and a life outside of work. Crazy assumption, especially in the Valley, but this is something that I think is actually good for us, right? And so you are mortal. That's the last one, right? Because if you're immortal, I don't think burnout really affects you. Maybe depression does, because something tragic could happen, but burnout, like exhausting yourself, you have physical limits and mental limits. So I want to first go over some of the causes I've seen of amotivational syndrome in developer advocates. And I want to start with this one because I think this is one of the biggest ones, but it's not actually really addressed all that often. And this one I think is actually particular to dev advocates or DevRel. And that is, you feel like you're banging your head against the wall all the time, trying to get people to understand what the product actually needs, right? So an example of this is marketing tries to force traditional, or what I like to call dumb, marketing on developers. And we've seen this, right, where they do, we're going to do a billboard, or we're going to do something in Inc. magazine, or we're going to come up with this a totally lame slogan, and developers are going to love it. And then we as DevRel people know that doesn't work. Another one is engineers or management with no real user experience making design decisions without feedback or testing. So in the absence of a lot of user feedback or testing, I think DevRel people fill that role. We fill the role of, okay, I am the user. Let me try it. I'm giving you feedback on how this feels as a user. I mean, if there's a lot of user feedback and testing with the right target audience, I don't think we need to play this role as much. But in a lot of companies, I haven't seen that much user testing for developers. And so when you have engineers or management who make these design decisions or without talking to us or anyone else, they're banging your head against the wall because you know they're not doing the right thing for your users, and there's nothing you can really do about it. And I find this extremely frustrating. And then back to that same group of engineering or managers, if they don't actually dog food the product, right? So even if this is especially worse, if you don't even see them using the product themselves to act like a developer. Because you're like, okay, you're not listening to me, but you're not even using the product to do what you want to do, and you still are making these design decisions. How can you do this? I find this to me, this is extremely wearing, and I've seen this with other developer relations people as well. And so why is this an issue, and why does it lead to burnout? It's because you care about your product, and you care about your users, and this is, the product is going in the wrong directions for your users. And the other reason is you're worried about being up on the stage or writing documentation, telling the users to use this product, and it's no good, right? You're like, how am I supposed to get up and tell people to do this when there's all these bad design decisions, or I have to talk around this? I actually find this wearing on my soul. And this is one of the ones, I've seen it in other DevRel groups I've been in, but I'd also love more feedback from the audience about this one. I think this is actually a pretty big one for a lot of DevRel people, that I've seen a lot of people quit or move on from jobs when they felt like they had actually no effective voice, or the people running the product didn't actually have developers in mind. So the next cause I'm going to talk about now is, you imagine this, you get on a plane, you get up and you speak in front of an audience, you put all that preparation, you do all that adrenaline, then you get in front of a trade show and you're sitting there working the booth, and you're working the booth on and off, and you're meeting and greeting with partners, with developers, with all sorts of people. Then there's no sunshine for this entire time. And then you decide, oh, what the heck, everybody's drinking, I'll have a few drinks as well. You have no time for exercise. So you're just basically standing in the booth all day, making your legs ache because you're standing on concrete floors, but you don't get really any exercise in. And then you get back on a plane and you fly home. And then you apply this liberally, like a lot, right? And what you end up with is, this is an example of places where you get burnt out from too much travel. And I've seen this a lot. There's a lot of blog posts about DeveloperRel people talking about this. So examples of this are, you're doing a road show along with your normal travel schedule for over 2.5 months. This isn't like you have to do years of this to actually burn yourself out, I have to say. Because this is not like people, the fun part is actually taking engineers to the booth, because they think you actually don't do anything. And you take people, they have an engineer do a booth, or have an engineer do the talk and then work the booth with you. And they're like, oh my God, I don't understand how you do this all the time. Another example is travel to the 3 different week-long shows in a month and a half. Like, that's actually a long, that's brutal to me. I don't know if other people feel that's brutal if they do that kind of stuff. Then again, I'm a little bit older than most of the DevRel people, but that 3 weeks, 3 separate weeks with like a week in between, of each of those is really brutal in terms of my schedule with jet lag and all that stuff. This is my favorite, is when I travel so much, I can't remember which of the last 3 places I parked my car at the airport is the one that applies to this trip. So like I do little mental games to try to remember where my car is. And I'm like, wait, am I playing the mental game from the trip before? Or is it the trip that I'm supposed to be on this one? And when that happens, I'm like, okay, I've been traveling too much because I can't even remember where I parked my car. And so why is this a problem? Because it's actually exhausting. It's just physically wears you down. Like a lot of the things that happen with depression and burnout in people has a lot to do with physical burnout. Like standing in front and talking to an audience, even if you like it, it's still exhausting because you're on for that whole time. And then working the booth, you're on that whole time. And then not getting enough exercise, probably not getting enough sleep, adding alcohol to the mix. Those things are all exhausting. And when you're exhausted, it's hard to feel good about the world. And it's also hard because you like having friends and having a life. Like this is really hard if you have children, if you have a partner, if you just have friends you like hanging with. One of the big problems for me is I'm having a really hard time, and I've put out a tweet about it once, or maybe it was a Facebook post, and I asked, how do you actually keep a regular schedule for exercise when you travel so much? And I couldn't, there's people who do certain things, but nobody actually is able to keep like a regular exercise schedule when they travel as much. They just let go and they do a modified exercise when they're traveling, but they exercise when they do it. But still, it's hard to keep up friendships because you're like, oh yeah, I'd love to go away that weekend. Oh no, I got to go do a show that week, or I'm going to be exhausted after that show. I can't really do it. So I find too much travel can burn developer rel people out really badly, especially when it involves shows. On the other end extreme of this is when you become some sort of faceless person inside of the company, right? And so you basically, what you're doing is you're sitting behind and you feel, I was going to make some sort of joke about you feel like the typical white male in their 40s, well, he's probably in his 30s, he's got a lot of hair, in their 30s, who's working some boring desk job and it's like Office Space or something like that, right? So part of the reason we became DevRel people is we didn't probably want that role for ourselves, right? We didn't actually just want to sit at a desk all day doing, filling out TP forms or something like that. So I think when we're too much in this role, it's actually hard as well. So examples of this, and I have one really big one for me, where I was, the job saw dev advocates as support and doc people. And so I was not allowed to do CFPs or travel for 4 months, and there was none on the horizon. And they would say like, oh yeah, we're gonna help you write this documentation to show something in your wheelhouse, like something you wanna work on. And it was nothing that I wanted to work on, right? So I think having developer advocate people, putting them in a position where they're not actually going out and talking to audiences or meeting with developers can lead to burnout as well. And it's a different thing, right? I've also seen places where the DevRel people are treated as people that have to write the documentation, all of the documentation. And if you want people to write documentation, then you should hire documentation people, not DevRel people. We can write some of it, we can write it in an emergency, but we're not content producers. That's not our main goal if you think of content as just written content. Why this burns people out? You didn't apply for this position, right? You probably didn't. I mean, they may have told you that, but you probably didn't apply for this position, and doing something you don't want to do all the time will burn you out. And you actually really, part of being DevRel is you want to get out and help users, and sitting behind a desk and answering support tickets, while it's helpful, is not the same as getting in front of people and helping people in that same way. There is a reason why we are not in support or in documentation. This one I think is interesting, and I think this one applies mostly to DevRel as well. And this one I'm calling bad team dynamics. And so I know bad team dynamics on any team will cause burnout for people, right? It's just exhausting. But for us, I think it's a bit different. This I call my flower of righteousness. There's another flower of righteousness, and I forget, Arun, you might remember his name, the one that you knew as a flower of righteousness.
This is by the high-tech dad.
Yeah, so high-tech dad has one that's very similar. These were two independent derivations of this at the same time. So he and I both came up with these independently, but they cover the same concept. And the idea is that as a DevRel person, you can fill in developer evangelist with whatever you'd like to call there, dev advocate, DevRel. We're a bridge between all these different groups. We don't sit usually in any of those groups unless we've been we may report to one of those groups, like you might be in marketing, or you might be in engineering, or you might be in product management as your like direct line, your boss, or whatever the organization puts you. But what you do at the company is usually you're a bridge between all these groups internally and the groups externally. And so when there's a lot of bad mojo between all these different groups or parts of these different groups, it actually affects us more than it might affect other people, because you're actually having to do a lot of bridging between different groups. And so examples, teams that can't communicate or agree on who is in charge of what feature. So I find that when I go back here, and so if there is like marketing and product management owns a website together and no one's clearly in charge, and you're trying to get content written or you're trying to make that site work better for your users, if you can't tag somebody or if you're constantly caught going back and forth between them, to me, that leads to a lot of burnout. A lot of bad blood between members of the same team and equals a lot of politics. And by same team, I mean like same product team, meaning everybody who's trying to support the product in sales, support, engineering, product management, marketing. Like, so basically if those different groups around your product don't really like each other or get along or know how to coordinate well together, you end up with a lot of playing a lot of politics. And I won't say this for all DevRel people, but I've seen a lot of DevRel people who are not good at politics. I would put myself in that group as well. I mean, I think there's something about that passionate part, which is we can inspire people, but we can also make a lot of enemies at the same time. And so if you're sitting there speaking your passionate pieces and there's all this, you say it the wrong way to the wrong group, you can end up in this kind of bad political mess. So I think that's one of the things that affects DevRel as well. Oops, wrong way. And the other problem is just too many chefs, right? When you're trying to go between that many different groups and coordinate, if there's too many chefs in charge, nothing really gets done, or there's no final decision maker and things just spin and you're sitting there stuck. And why you care about this is because you want to do your job well, or it causes a lot of frustration around that. And if you wanted politics, you would have been in management or marketing. I don't think you joined your job to be political. You probably wanted to teach and help users with your product because you love the product so much, right? And you're inspired to make it happen. So the last one is, I don't know if any of you have seen Office Space, but this is a scene from Office Space. And it's actually a pretty funny scene. But the idea is you're not really doing much work. Like, you don't actually aren't doing much DevRel work. And examples of this are you're in the transition on a product, so you don't have actually any product to push, to talk about, to evangelize, to go out and do stuff with. So you're just sitting around being like, okay, what am I supposed to do now? I mean, some people like that. I don't think most DevRel people I've met are like that at all, right? Most DevRel people I've met generally like to be out and doing and talking and working, right? Like working hard. And the other example is you're not doing mostly dev advocate work, right? You get called in to do a whole bunch of other stuff. You're not actually working on the stuff that you should be working on as a dev advocate. And so why this matters to you? Because you want to do your job, right? This is my job. I feel like I should do my job, and I can't because I have nothing to do it with. And you are passionate, and if this I've seen a lot, you're probably a passionate person, and if that energy is not directed in positive ways, it will go to bad places. So that passionate energy will go towards things that are not actually helpful for the team. I know this happens to me a lot. I actually have to pay attention to this. Like, where if I feel like I can't actually be passionate about the product, I will see myself getting passionate about things that actually aren't that important, but I'm getting worked up because I need something to be worked up about, and I'm causing problems, right? And then that just causes political issues and all sorts of other stuff, right? So I think I've tried to go through a bunch of the different causes I've seen. You may have your own causes depending on the company that you're in or the type of dev advocate work you're doing. And don't forget, I tried to pick out things which are just particular to dev advocacy. I've known dev advocates who've quit or moved on or been burnt out because their actual team sucked, right? But that's, I don't think, particular to dev advocates. I think that's particular to just being on a sucky team, right? And that'll burn you out. So I'm going to try to go through some of the fixes I've thought of, right? These are not magical. These are just things I've seen or done myself that have helped me through some of those times. I would love to hear other people's fixes or thoughts on this. So one of them is get a therapist. And you might think this is a joke, but I actually don't think it's a joke. I mean, unless this is a very Western way of approaching it, is to get a therapist. If you have some sort of advisor that can help you be more reflective about what's going on and what you're feeling, then get that person in your life. The reason I don't say get a friend is, and this has been shown with romantic relationships as well, friends are not necessarily the best people to help you with those problems, because friends are your friends. So they, like when you say, oh, this sucked and this sucked and this sucked, they generally go, yeah, that person's terrible, or yeah, your job is terrible. I'm totally with you. And you get even more worked up about your feelings of this is the worst thing in the world, right? The role of the therapist or some other external advisor, whoever that is to get you to stop and reflect and to think more about what's going on, not necessarily to agree with you and tell you how much you are right, right? And that's why I'm not saying get a friend, because friends tend to tell you you're right, and that's actually really terrible. Unless you have a good friend who can actually be more like a therapist. Pay attention. So I think one of the things is we actually get really busy and we travel a lot and we have a lot of calls on us and we're multitasking a lot. I think our job is a very multitasking kind of role. And unlike, I mean, I know engineers do, but sometimes they can go heads down on like a block of code for a long time. That's not like something that we actually tend to do. And so I think we actually have to pay a lot of attention to, am I tired? Am I getting really upset about this? Like pay attention to spend some time paying attention to your feelings and what's happening in the job so you can catch yourself before you get to burnout. Like, oh, I'm getting exhausted and I've traveled too much. I need to stop, right? So I think paying attention, these two things are nothing magical, and you'll see them in a lot of like therapists. You could say get a guru, get a rabbi, get a priest, just get somebody outside and then pay attention. That's almost all the major schools of wisdom say one of the keys is starting to pay attention to your world. So these are not great big insights from me. They're just ways the world kind of works. Say no. And the funny part is that when I said this, I was first going to say, oh, well, you got to say no to travel and da-da-da. But I find, at least in myself, most of the saying no is to myself. I like to travel. I like to get out in front of people and talk. I like to actually take on a new coding project. I like to take on things. And so as I've done this more and more, I've learned more and more to say no to myself. Like, because you're going to get people to ask you things all the time. The first person you have to say no to is yourself and say, no, yeah, that looks really fun. I'm not going to do that. Now I'm going to tell the other person I'm not doing that. Because if you don't say no to yourself first, as somebody who really likes to get out and probably interact with developers, doesn't mean you're totally social. You don't want to go to parties. You don't necessarily want to, you're not an extrovert, but you want to be out and interacting with developers or helping them or seeing what they're doing. You have to be able to say, no, I'm not going to do that even though I want to do that. And that's what I mean. Being able to say, I'm not going to do that even though I really, really want to do that, because it will lead me down more burnout. I need to rest now. Take a break. And I've been lucky in a couple positions where I've been able to, like, we had a downtime in the project. I was particularly burnt out and I just didn't work as much for a little while, right? The company doesn't want me necessarily. A lot of companies don't want you to leave once they've gotten you. And there's this, you know, when I was in college, I was going to, at one point I thought I was going to be a high school teacher. And so I took some education classes, and there was this really neat case study of an alternative school in England where the kids were really self-directed about what they worked on in terms of education. And I think that's a lot like how most of us actually work. Rather, most of us don't come into work every day, sit in a desk, and then have people talk at us the whole time. And so this American was going over to this British school where this was being done, and he was walking around and he was seeing kids doing all these self-directed activities. And at the end of 3 days that he was walking around and watching the kids, he went up to the British person and said, look, I want to ask you about Katie. And the British person said, oh, really? I knew you were going to ask me about Katie. And the American was like, yeah, Katie's been sitting on the swings basically for like the last 3 days, or just like walking around aimlessly, not doing very much. And the British person said, yeah, you know, Katie's actually took on some really hard math, and she worked really hard on it for a really long time. And Katie's recovering now. She's just kind of chilling out and getting ready to build up her energy for the next thing. And so we don't force them to do anything during that time because they've actually exerted themselves quite a bit. Right. And for those of you that are athletes, I know I'm not, but I aspire to be an athlete. But there is the idea that after a race, you don't go back the next day and run a race, and you don't go back and start training immediately the day after you ran a long race. Right. You actually give your body time to recover. And I think we would do ourselves more service that if we've done like that time after I did that, where I did the roadshow schedule and my normal talk schedule, I basically for like a month to a month and a half, I wasn't doing nearly as much work as I usually do. I was burnt. I couldn't think. I was napping. I was reading some technical work, you know, and playing around a bit with some of the stuff, but it wasn't really on point, and I couldn't be. Like it would have done more damage to try to stay on point during that time. It was actually very helpful that I could take that time. I was still working. I wasn't like, oh, I'm off on the beach in Tahiti, see you later. But I was not expecting myself to be at the same level of productivity, and nor was my work expecting that. And it was really helpful for me. So that's what take a break means. If you can do this at your company, I think and if you're a manager of a DevRel person, I think it's really important to understand this, because our work tends to be bursty. The spring and the autumn are very heavy conference seasons. And so we tend to burn ourselves out during that season, and it's good to give us breaks after a lot of that travel, if we do a lot of travel. The other thing is calm the fuck down, right? So this one is, things may not really be as bad as you think they are. So just calm down with the politics, or calm down with the needing to necessarily push the product a certain way. I have found this, at least with myself, where I'll get myself all worked up and I'm really passionate about something, and really what I just need to do is calm down and just let things pass for a while. Because sometimes just doing nothing and just calming down and just letting things pass is actually the best way to see what's actually going to happen without burning yourself out, or to let things just evolve. Like, state your piece, but then calm down and just let it go, right? Or don't get so excited about everything that you think might affect the users. Pick your battles, right? Switch hats for a little while. I've done this before, where I was kind of burnt on the DevRel stuff. And this is like, even though I stayed in my DevRel role, I started doing statistical analysis. I really like statistics. My background is actually a PhD in ecology, and it was a lot of quantitative ecology. And I did a lot of statistics. And so I started doing some statistics related to the product. Like, I was looking at user stats and stuff like that and analyzing patterns of behavior. But I wasn't doing any DevRel work. I wasn't going out for talks. I wasn't writing blog pieces about the product. I was just doing something else I really enjoyed that would help the company, but that wasn't exactly my little hat. But I knew I wasn't going to do this forever, right? So this is, all the things I'm doing right now, that I'm talking about now, are ways to prevent you from quitting, right? These are all kind of in order of importance. Like, so right now, we're almost at the verge of quitting. And so now you're thinking, I need to switch hats just for a little bit so that I don't get so worked up, right? So the next level of escalation is to stop caring. And this is really hard. I know it's hard, at least it is for me. But at some point, you have to, if things like, especially in those battles, like especially with the engineers and the product managers, if they're not going to listen to your advice, and you see the product going in the wrong way, and you've done your passionate arguments and nothing seems to be changing, if you still want to stay in your job, because there's lots of reasons people stay in their jobs, like, oh, I don't want to move. My kids are in the middle of a school year, or they're having a really tough time in school, or this salary pays really well, or whatever reason. The next option to you to prevent burnout, which I think is my goal here, is to stop caring quite so much. It might be stop caring overall. Like, be one of those desk people, like, okay, you expect this many blog posts and this many talks, and I'll just do them. I'll do them. I'm not going to complain. You know, when I give the talks, I'm going to try not to put my reputation on the line too much when I give the talk, because I know I don't really love the product as much as I should. So I'm going to be careful about what I talk about. And when I blog, I'm going to blog about stuff that I don't necessarily feel too impassioned about, but I'll do my work and I'll just do it. And I'm going to stop caring quite so much. I don't know how long-term sustainable this is in a job. It all depends on your personality. But this is one of the ways that you can weather a bad time period inside a company when there's a lot of burnout happening around, not so much around the travel, because this isn't about travel. This is more about the management and the product going the wrong way. It's the stop caring. Because I think that's one of the things that actually burns out dev advocates, is the product not being something that they feel really good about. Or kills our motivation, right? It's not maybe burnout, it actually just kills our motivation. Burnout's a particular type of killing your motivation, but your motivation can also be killed if you don't care about the product or you don't believe in the product as much. And so maybe you consciously stop caring for a while. The next one is leave, right? And this is more of a self-protection measure, right? At a certain point, you just have to say, well, yeah, I can't do this anymore. And it's just best for me to leave. Like, me arguing with everybody, not good for my health. Me writing documentation all the time and being really miserable, I'm going. right? You requiring this travel schedule and I'm exhausted and you won't stop. Yep, I'm done, right? Like, it's okay to leave. There's a couple different, if you listen to, there's two different podcasts I've been listening to. I listen to lots of them, but there's two that have talk about quitting lately. One is, I forget, it's like I forgot one. The other is I'll try to remember it while it'll come to me. The other is the Freakonomics. So Freakonomics just had a podcast episode on the value of quitting. And then there was another one, and it's like called The Human Brain, or it's from NPR. It's called, I don't exactly remember. It's something about, there's the word brain in the title. And there's another one on that examines quitting versus grit and the trade-offs between them. Our culture has a lot of stuff to say about how bad quitting is. I'm conflicted on it. Having kids, having myself, seeing my friends around me, I don't think it's always so clear when was the right time to quit and when's the right time to stay. Seth Godin has a book, When to Stick and When to Quit. I haven't read it yet. It's on my to-do list for a long time. I think that might be interesting reading. I think one of the things that came out of the Brain podcast was the podcast host said at the end, maybe the value of quitting versus gritting it out depends on the outcome at the end. And there's no way to know that. So the value of quitting versus gritting it out, it's a leap of faith at a certain point. And I don't know how else to put that. But I do not think you should think, if the situation is burning you out, I think you should leave. There's no reason to do that unless you have some really hard reason you can't. Our field, there's a lot of dev advocate positions right now. You can actually go and find another position quite readily, and they usually allow dev advocates to work remote. Okay, so that's the end of my talk. Again, this was mostly about what kills motivation for us. I'd love to hear your feedback. There's all my coordinates again, and there's, if you want to copy the slides, I think I put it in the first slide. The slides are licensed Creative Commons 0. Although most of the pictures I got from Creative Commons off of Flickr or someplace else. So they're reshareable as well, as long as you keep attribution. Anywhere you see attribution, keep it. So thank you very much. I hope it was helpful, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Steve. I think this was really good. I've been taking some snapshots and posting them on Twitter as well. I have some points, some questions, some experiences to share along with as well. So, for example, you talked about travel. As a DevRel person, we do travel pretty heavily. We are people.
Says the man in the hotel room.
Yeah, exactly. People make fun of it. That you've been to so many cities, but essentially is airplane, taxi, hotel, taxi, airplane. There is barely any eating outside. Is the conference junk food that we get to eat. So how do you strike a balance? How much percentage of time do you travel on average in a month?
It's bursty. So that's the other thing that I was going to say. It's really bursty. Like, so January and February and half of March, I didn't travel at all. But then I had a period where I was traveled like 5 times in 2 months, right? So it really depends on which conferences I want to go to. And, do I really feel like I need to talk there, or does my company really need me there? I think one of the other, I try now to pay more attention to, I'm exhausted. I'm taking a break now. I'm not going to, I've got these CFPs already done. I'm not doing any CFPs for a little while after that, no matter how much I really want to go to that show. I think one of the other things I've stopped doing is doing that. I'm going to the conference. I'm going to fly in, take taxi, hotel, conference, taxi, airplane, home. I've stopped doing that so much. I'll usually try to get there at least like a day before and go out and walk around the city, or I'll miss going to talks, or I'll tell people I'm not working the booth this morning, and I'll actually go see the city or go outside and just walk around, not think that I have to spend all my time in the conference, because that actually does lead to burnout. Like, I need some recharge time. If I'm going to fly to Bangkok, I'm not doing that just to fly to Bangkok, go to a hotel, get back on the plane and go back. Like, that's a place I'll never get a chance to go. I'm going to take a little time for myself and go see something when I can. I don't do that all the time. And I don't do like long extravagance unless I take a vacation or something around that. But I actually now try more, like for OSCON, we were both there. I came in, there was the kids' day that we did together. And then I had a day in between, and I went and walked around the city. I went and looked for bats. I went out to different restaurants, talked to people, not so much because I like being by myself mostly. But I did a little bit just to say, oh, this is what Austin's like. That's kind of interesting. And it was helpful to me in not getting so burnt out about it. Like I felt like, oh, I kind of know Austin now, rather than, yeah, I went to Austin once to give a talk. So I don't know what other people do on that one. But
right. I agree. And I think that's very useful, very helpful as well, because I've I've been to 40 plus countries. You've probably been to more, but those 40 plus countries, as I remember going to South Africa once only for like 10 hours. I took like a 10-hour flight down. I was in South Africa for 10 hours and I landed 7 o'clock in the morning and I left South Africa by 4 p.m. in the afternoon. So that's not really a visit to South Africa, really.
No. Right. I think, and that's the other hard part that actually causes friction with your team sometimes. Not your dev advocate team, but your other team. They're like, oh, you get to travel so much. It's so fun and exciting. And you get to all these countries. And I'm like, it's not so fun and exciting because it's not like vacation. It's actually hard to explain. It was very hard to explain to my ex-wife. And it was hard in the beginning to explain to my girlfriend, because she's like, oh, you get to go do all these fun things in all these countries. And I was like, okay, come on these trips with me a couple times. And so my girlfriend's come with me and she's like, oh, I could never do what you do. I'm like, yeah, these aren't vacations. It's not like I'm traveling for vacation. I mean, this is where I think talking to salespeople at your company could actually be helpful in getting tips, because salespeople actually travel way more than we do. And they somehow seem not to burn out. So I would love talking to them a bit more.
Yeah. And doing across these time zones, taking care of your baggage, making sure you are checked in, making sure your car is there.
Right.
That is pretty strenuous work. So that's absolutely great tips. Now, one of the points you mentioned was about, yes, we do docs, we do support. One of the biggest things that we want to clarify is we are not the docs team. We are not the support team. We will do this on a need basis, but don't take us as the person who will write the entire documentation for the project.
Exactly. And I think that's actually, I think that comes from our role being so new, right? Where I think this is up to us as DevRel people to keep pushing back when that gets happened to us. Like, that's not a DevRel position. That's like the same thing as if you ask the engineers to write all the docs, right? Or to answer the engineers to answer all the support calls. If you're at a company where the engineers are doing that exact same thing and PM is doing that exact same thing, then it's fine that they ask that of us, right? They're not seeing us as any different than anybody else. But if the engineers are working on code all day and the PMs are doing their product management all day, and they're like, oh, well, the DevRel people do support and do the docs, then that's not okay. Because then don't hire a dev advocate, right? You've hired the wrong person and you're going to get angry people. The one company where that really happened to me, we were 3 of the unhappiest DevRel, and I felt bad for our manager. I mean, it wasn't his fault that we were stuck doing that. It was higher up the chain. But I really felt bad for our manager because he had 3 very unhappy, passionate people on his hand. And,
so this is not only a burnout for the DevRel person itself, but for the company as well, because they're going to lose those people.
Yeah, exactly. And so either that company has to say, yes, so this is one of the things where good interviewing, although in this case, I even did do this in the interview, but it didn't matter. Things changed before I started. But this is where you, as the DevRel person interviewing there, you can help get yourself not into those positions, where you can ask specifically, what is it you expect me to do most of the time? Why do you need developer advocates at your company? Why are you hiring them? Why do you need developers using your product? And if they can't give you a good answer for that, I would not take that job.
True.
Right? Because that is actually a company that hasn't really thought about, or another one is, how many people do you have working on your API or your developer product? So if it's an API company that they want, or an API they want you to advocate, and they say they've got, we've got 1 part-time engineer and we're thinking about hiring another, don't take that job. Because that job will be, or take the job saying, no, I need 2 full-time engineers for the API. Otherwise, I'm not coming.
Right.
Because you'll just get into that position where you're going to burn.
Very valid point. Well, one of the things that you said, and we all face that dilemma all the time, saying no to yourself.
Yeah.
So we always end up working on the bleeding edge of the technology. So there are so many fun things happening all the time. There is IoT, there is containers, there is microservices, there is DevOps. You name a technology, and we want to associate ourselves with that technology. So one way that I deal with it is, within our team, we maintain a Trello board. So I maintain sort of a task that Trello board. These are my Trello cards, and I prioritize them. That, you know what? yes, this is interesting, exciting, but it goes in my backlog, and I'll deal
Right.
with it when I can.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that is important. Like to get really clear on what you want to do. Like, I'm really tired from traveling. Okay, then make sure that traveling is not on the top of your list when you go to do things. Like pay attention. That's back to that pay attention, right? So making that Trello list is paying attention. Here's what I want for my life. Here's the order I want them to happen in my life. And I'm going to keep going back to that Trello list when I'm making decisions so that I'm not making decisions that aren't in line with what I actually want to do.
Right, right, right. Yeah, excellent. And one last point that I want to mention also is you talked about exercise. You don't get no exercise. So one thing that I'm super religious about is whenever I travel, and I do travel like you do. So the first thing that I pack up is my running shoe. So no matter what, which country, which hotel I am, I'm always looking for like, guys, I need to have a gym in the hotel. It may be a little bit more expensive, but that's the cost that I'm willing to incur just to keep my life balanced. So I'm in Seattle right now. Just finished DockerCon. It's a beautiful trail by the waterfront. So I did a 10K this morning. Now I know my day is going to be better. So I think that's a very important part. And specifically when we are traveling, either consciously or subconsciously, we end up eating junk food. So getting that workout is actually more important.
Yeah, actually, so that's what I've also started paying more attention to is what I eat. Because for me, I'm still grappling with the exercise issue. I'm a complicated person. I don't like exercising first thing in the morning. I can't stand running, which makes it difficult, but I'm working on it. But I can pay attention to what I eat, and I've really tried to cut out eating all the refined sugar and drinking lots of caffeine. Because I find, at least for me, so this is all personal for everybody. Work it out. Again, pay attention and work it out for yourself. But for me, if I eat a lot of refined sugar, like all the cakes and the candies, and I'm drinking a lot of caffeine, I come down very, very hard off of that. And it wipes me out. So I've been trying to cut down on that kind of, at least in my diet, that kind of stuff as well. Yeah. We had one question from Ray. Yes. So as a person who works alongside DevRel advocates, what 3 things could a marketing PM do to help reduce burnout? So I'm not sure if Ray means what can they do to help us? Is that what you mean, Ray? Can you respond if you're still there quickly on Twitter?
Works alongside DevRel to reduce burnout. Yeah,
I'm gonna assume you want to help us, Ray, because you're such a great person. I would say the one thing for marketing is if you haven't marketed to developers before, stop making us market the way you were taught to market. Work with us as a partner and an enabler rather than this is how marketing is done and you don't understand what you're doing. Most of us are developers, and most of us actually have a little bit of sense about what works marketing to developers. Work with us as a partner, not necessarily as a gatekeeper. PM, I would say the biggest thing I would say at a PM is use us as your feedback and make sure the things we put in actually get into the product in a timely fashion. I know PM is got a bunch of different people making demands on them. There's enterprise people, there's customers, there's salespeople, there's all sorts of stuff. But we are just as important, especially if you're a developer product, because we're actually out there meeting with developers day in and day out. We're the ones actually using the product, watching developers use the product. If you care about the user experience, which is an if, right? But if you care, if you want your developers to feel delighted and wowed by the product, then pay attention to what we're saying and actually move it into the product into a timely fashion. Because if you don't, we feel frustrated and not motivated, because what difference does it make what I do or what I find out or what I give back to you? Because it's never going to get into the product anyway. And so then I'm not motivated to do that stuff anymore. And the product will suffer because of it. So I hope those are what you were asking, Ray.
Yeah, I mean, with PM particularly, I work with them very closely for my team, where we identify the top features that are going to be part of the messaging, and then we feed it into our developer messaging as we are preparing blogs, generating content, things like that. So that's sort of the outbound developer marketing. And then the inbound side of it is, we spoke at an event and we got this feedback about the product, we capture it, and I make sure I send it to the PM team. So it's both inbound and outbound in that sense.
Yep, that's true. Also, keep us in you're right. Keep us in your plans about what what you see the vision for the product, so that we can communicate that out to developers. Don't just be like, and work with us. It's both. Most of it, I think, for dev advocates or DevRel people is we like to team, right? We like to be involved. We don't necessarily have to make the decision, but we like to be able to be involved, give feedback, and know that our feedback makes sense, and we can get stuff from you also, so that we can hear it, so that we can make intelligent statements when we go out.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, one last thing that I would like to say is, one of the things that I do is I like to watch, certain series like, Silicon Valley or whatever those are. So when I'm traveling and I get a break, I'm not shy. Like, I was in London 2 weeks ago. I arrived the day before. The very next day, I had a talk in the afternoon. So I would just sit back, and I'm gonna be in a quiet zone in a bean bag. I'll take a quick 30-minute nap. Or I said, I don't want to talk to anybody. I'm gonna go in my zone, get in my man cave. I'm gonna watch one episode of Silicon Valley. That just refreshes me and lightens me up without worrying about the technology. So I think there are multiple ways by which the key part is observe those syndromes. And once you observe those syndromes are coming up, then take preventive actions.
And don't feel bad that you're taking care of yourself. I think that's weird. I think DevRel people in general tend to be people pleasers. We want to please people. I think that's part of who we are as people. The ones that I've seen who do this a lot, they like to make people happy. And so I think we tend to feel bad when people are like, come on out to dinner with us after the meetup. And I'm like, no. Now I'm like, no, I'm not going to. I know it'll burn me out even more. I'm tired after giving the talk and traveling all day. I'm going to go back to my room, flip open my laptop, and play Destiny, right? Or Division, or some other video game, and not talk to anybody. Just leave me alone. And I don't feel bad about it anymore.
Right. And I'll just do room service. I don't want to talk to anybody at all.
Absolutely. Exactly.
No, I think that's cool. Stephen, this has been actually fantastic, and I completely empathize with everything that you have said, because I've experienced that myself.
Right. Thanks so much for having me on, Art. It was really fun to talk about it.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right. Take care.
Bye, everybody.